Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. Listen diligently to me, and eat what is good, and let your soul delight itself.
All right. So the question is about the Abrahamic covenant, and the sign of the Abrahamic covenant was circumcision, but obviously that sign only applies to half the population. That begs the question: what can the women do? I don't know that I have a complete answer for that, but let me give you what I know. First of all, I would say that the men were in this day, they were the leaders of their homes. They were the patriarchs. They were the ones. So in Hebraic thought, if the men did it, then it, in a sense, that was representative of the whole clan, the whole patriarch, and it was the men's responsibility to teach their families these things. So basically, if a man makes a covenant for his family, that covenant is binding for his entire family. Even as we have leaders in our day, whether it be our founding fathers of the United States, they made a covenant called the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And those are laws that apply to us, male, female, or anybody that comes into this country from that point on down. Or we have legislatures and courts and things. Well, courts aren't supposed to make laws, but the legislative branch of government makes laws that are applicable to all of us. So here, in a sense, with the men being circumcised, it was a representative form of government that when they entered into that covenant, that was binding upon everyone. Now, the sign of the Mosaic covenant, which was a subsection of the Abrahamic covenant, was, and it covered different things. That was the Sabbath, and of course the Sabbath is applicable to everybody. Now, as Dr. Joe said, and this is correct, the bigger picture, without getting into a deep study of circumcision, but let me just say this. Circumcision occurred on the 8th day, and it involved cutting, most likely not the entire foreskin, but the very tip. This is the circumcision is done today is not what was done in ancient times. They would pull the foreskin out, and they would snip it at the end of the head, beyond the head. So there'd be still part of it that would be still attached to the head of the penis. Now, the idea of a complete circumcision, as is done today, that is something that Jews, from the research that I've done, that's something the Jews came up with in the early AD period. And I haven't studied this out in a while, but there were some Jewish scholars and Jewish medical doctors who researched this out and published a paper that was very convincing to me. And I'm pulling up from my memory now, but the reason, if memory serves me correct, I don't have access to this information except off the top of my head at this point. But the reason that they made, if I remember correctly, that they made the circumcision to remove a complete, in that it was removed all of the foreskin, is because I believe that during Roman persecution of the early Common Era, the circumcision was a stigma, and that sometimes male Jews, Jewish men would reverse their circumcisions. Now we see this concept of reversal of circumcision mentioned in the book of Maccabees. There where when Antiochus Epiphanes and his Assyrian Greeks came in to take over the land of Israel in that intertestamental period, and they endeavored to impose Hellenism or Greek culture upon the Israelites, upon the Jews, the post-exilic Jews. That part of that was they built a sports arena in Jerusalem called a gymnasium, or gymnasium, where we get the word from. And basically, the athletes competed in the nude. That's what they did. You remember all those statues of the Greek Olympians there in the nude. And so the Jews, those Jews that felt it was better to go along and get along than remain faithful to their values, to their religious scruples, they would reverse their circumcisions. Now, it's impossible to reverse a circumcision as it is done now. There's no way. But if it's only, the foreskin is only cut part way, theoretically it could be stretched out and I wouldn't know, but it could be stretched out so it, and the skin could be stretched to cover the entire head of the penis. And I believe, if I remember right from this study that I read by these scholars and experts and Jewish medical professionals, that the Jews decided in the early part of the AD period to cut off all the foreskin. That way it would make it and make that the method of circumcision to make it impossible to reverse it. And therefore, Jews can't go back, if you will, and become like heathens. Now, that's just a little side note. The reason I said that is that the snip at the end of the foreskin was like it was not as invasive as is done today, if this information is correct that I've just recounted to you. And so we might call it a half circumcision, but the purpose of circumcision was largely symbolic. Now, I was circumcised when I was 8 days old by my parents, so I don't know what it's like to be uncircumcised. But we have had a few people in our congregation over the years, several that have been circumcised as adults. And I have interviewed them. And it is a health, sanitation issue, but and that's the largest thing. And sometimes it's also without proper cleansing, it can be a place where bacteria and fungus and stuff is harbored if one doesn't clean it oneself properly regularly. So the cutting away the foreskin is a symbol of removing some of the filth of the flesh and of the world away from a person. And because it was done on the 8th day, 8 is a number of new beginnings, and even the numeral 8 is the number of infinity. In other words, beyond 7. 7 is the number of completion or perfection, and so 8 is eternity. The 8th day, for example, representing Olam Haba, the world to come, and extending into the future. So the cutting away of the foreskin was symbolic of new life, new beginning, cutting away of the flesh, cutting away of that part of the flesh that harbors disease, filth, and is hard to clean. And therefore it was a very easy metaphor or symbol for circumcision of the heart. Because it is the heart of man that is deceitful above all things, Jeremiah 17:9. And it is out of the abundance of the mouth, the heart speaks, Yeshua said. And so out of the heart proceeds a lot of filth. The male penis, out of it come forth the issues of life, the seed of life. And it's also the thing that goes before a man, if you know what I mean. It's the part that sticks out as he goes. So this was symbolic of a man proceeding from a man is clean seed, good seed, and that's what goes before him as he's, if you will, I guess you could say, marching into his spiritual destiny, into moving into eternal life. And the man being the leader, the authority, was supposed to lead his family into these things. Now, because salvation is an individual matter, now let's just say circumcision was not a matter of salvation. That was settled at the Acts 15 conference, the First Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, where the issue is circumcision a precondition for salvation, and it had become that in rabbinic or in that pre-rabbinic Judaism, and it is still a precondition for becoming part of rabbinic Jewish community today, among several other things that are supposed to be done. So you can't become a part of Israel or let's say rabbinic Judaism without being circumcised, and that goes back to that tradition and a misunderstanding of, or I don't think they misunderstand. They just decided to exclude Gentiles, and it became a club that unless you go through the right rituals, you can't get into it. But we know that Abraham was, righteousness was accounted or accredited to him 24 years or so before he was circumcised. He left Ur of the Chaldees at age 75. He was circumcised at age, I think it was 99. And so it was accredited to him for righteousness' sake, his act of obedience, obeying Jehovah and coming out of Babylonia and coming to his inheritance in the promised land, which is a picture of our spiritual inheritance. And so circumcision wasn't a precondition. However, circumcision was to be a sign or an evidence of that faith, that obedience, and of the type of life he was to walk. Now, as such, the Abrahamic covenant, and Paul makes this very clear in Romans chapter 5, where he says, likens salvation by grace through faith. That's actually quoting Ephesians 2. But he likens the pattern of salvation, and he uses that the Abrahamic covenant as the basis for his theology in this. That's actually chapter 4 of Romans. So, all that to say this, the Abrahamic covenant is a picture of salvation for the believer. Although women can't be, obviously, physically circumcised. So physical circumcision is not, obviously, a precondition for salvation. Otherwise, women could not be saved. However, what physical circumcision represents, the condition of the heart and the direction that one is to now walk in spiritually, is pictured by circumcision of the heart, which is, again, not a New Testament or a Pauline concept, but it's mentioned 3 times in the Torah. I think it's Numbers and definitely in Deuteronomy, as something that Yehovah wanted for his people. So, anyway, I hope that clarifies that and sheds a little light on that subject. Yes?
I don't know if this is the time to discuss this, but it seems to me like I have some brothers, and my parents chose only to circumcise me out of my brothers.
Were you
And
the oldest
so-
or the youngest?
I am the oldest, actually.
Oh, interesting. So they lost heart afterwards.
So, yeah, I don't know if it was what the reasons were. I never really spoke to him about it, but it's interesting because I've seen God dealing in a different way with my brothers than me. Like, they're not very sensitive to the Torah and that type of stuff, but at the same time I see them, well, one of them walking and following God, and another not so much. And so that's kind of brought to me, I've kind of started to consider it more of, if you are circumcised, you need to be walking in the Torah and these things. But if you aren't, I don't know if God deals with you differently being an uncircumcised. If there's another, I think the Ten Commandments still stand for everyone. But it seems like the uncircumcised have a different, and I don't want to be presenting some false doctrine or something like that. That's just what I've been.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. And these are questions I've asked myself. If you go to Romans chapter 4, verse 11, it says, and he received the sign, talking about Abraham, he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of righteousness, a seal of the righteousness of faith, which he had still, while still uncircumcised. So this is a sign, a seal. It's like a ring. A ring signifies, marriage. It's a symbol of something. I think physical circumcision is a symbol of something. It's interesting that there's been a move in this country, in America, in the last few years to stigmatize, if not criminalize, circumcision in certain areas, like in California and so forth. It just seems like anything that's godly or righteous is being assailed in this country. I do believe, this is my belief, that those who are going to be at the higher levels of rewards in the kingdom are going to be circumcised physically and spiritually. Now, where do I get that from? First of all, two things. There are people who want to obey Elohim to the fullest extent possible, in body and in spirit. And many times, people think, why do you want to get circumcised as an adult? They think it's crazy, but there's something burning deep inside. Now, I haven't had to cross that, but I've talked to a number of men who just feel that they want to. It's just something, and I'm not going to stop them. That some people have criticized them, but I think these are people that don't understand the deeper things of Yehovah. You can be saved and not be baptized. The thief on the cross was not baptized for the remission of sins, but he was saved. But he's probably going to have he's going to probably be least in the kingdom. I don't know. There's levels of rewards. But if you come to Yeshua, you're going to want to be baptized for the remission of sins. I believe if you want to be a king and a priest in his kingdom, you're going to want to be baptized because it says, or circumcised, because it says in Ezekiel 30 and 40, talks about the priests that minister. Now, however you understand Ezekiel's temple, whether it's a future temple or whether it's an allegorical temple speaking of the renewed or new covenant, whatever, either way, it says in verse 44, chapter 44, verse 9, thus says Adonai Yehovah, no foreigner, uncircumcised in heart or uncircumcised in flesh, shall enter my sanctuary, including any foreigner who is among the children of Israel. So, here you have
That's the one I was looking for.
Gentiles, foreigners, entering the tabernacle, which is not that was not permitted in the first or the second temple, and also and they are to be, on top of that, circumcised. So I look at this verse and I say, why would you not want to be circumcised? Regardless of how we understand Ezekiel's temple, I would think you'd want to be ready. Obviously the heart issue is the biggest one. But also what it represents. Spiritually, the physical act, that's pretty important in Elohim's order of things. Now, let's look at the dietary laws. there are no penalties listed for eating swine or trafe, unclean meats. None. Many of the Torah laws have penalties, ranging from one all the way to the other, all the way from minor to major, including capital punishment. But there's no punishment for the dietary laws. And yet, he says, he represents holiness. Several times in Leviticus 11, be ye holy for I am holy, be ye kadosh for I am kadosh. It's a holiness issue, and he also calls it an abomination for those who don't do it. And it's repeated again in Isaiah 66. So even though there's no penalty stipulated in the Torah, although the wages of sin is death, and it's a command in the Torah, so in the bigger sense, it is a sin, and the wages of sin is death. But in the Torah, some people say, well, it's not that important. But it's a holiness issue, and you still better do it because he commands it. And I see if you really want to obey Yehovah, you're going to walk out this holiness thing. And I think it does sharpen your conscience. I think it sharpens your ability to hear his voice. When you walk things out physically, you also get deeper understanding spiritually. And you're just getting rid of the junk in your life, and it opens up the river of life and your ability to hear him and to walk with him better. And unfortunately, there are many people who in the church who don't understand these things. To them, it's just a mental trip and an emotional trip, but they're not walking it out literally. The Sabbath, well, it's just one day in 7, and then every day is a Sabbath, and we're resting, Lord, and they have all these, and they don't, thank you, they don't fully understand a double anointing here, coffee and tea.
Yep. Well, wanted coffee.
Yeah, thank you.
Here you go.
Could you put a little cream and sugar in there?
Sorry.
Well, that's all right. I think there's a little more room on the top. Anyway, we'll let it cool down. Just a dab. When we come to a when you're ready to go back out. Maybe.
All right.
There you go. Thank you very much. So that's my sense. I just want to obey Elohim all the way. It's not about legalism. It's not about. I love him. I love his Torah. I love Yeshua. I love the Bible. I just want to get in and do it. I mean, this world doesn't have anything to offer. Why do I want to follow it? What and what else is there but the word of Elohim? This is my life. And like you, I just want to obey him. And to me, now some men may not be convicted to want to be circumcised if they're not. That's between them and Yehovah. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to cross that bridge. But let me just tell you, there is a doctor in this city, a Jewish, he's a medical doctor, he's a urologist. And he did it for somebody that used to be in this congregation that's moved away. It was like $500 or $600. It's not terribly expensive. And I was there when it happened. I wasn't in the operating room. Oh, Bill, God bless you. But I met the young man there, and and he walked out afterwards. He was in there for an hour or so, whatever it was. He walked out, or I should say, kind of waddled out. And I prayed with him, and we had we went into a little place, a set apart place, and I prayed and I prophesied over him and I ministered to him, and then he was a little bit sore for a couple of weeks, but within a couple of days he was out shopping and running around. And I knew a man who was in his around 70 who got circumcised, and he was the next day he was driving and a little sore, but carefully. So it's not a terrible thing to have happen. Amen. Yeah, Bill.
Okay, I understand the circumcision of heart. That's clear to me. But unlike some of the people who grew up in the Hebraic way, unlike millions of men, this circumcision is automatic. And so therefore, I don't have this concept. I understand that circumcision is important, but I don't have that experience, because I just, we're not anti-Semitic, we're all circumcised and it was just.
It was a cultural thing in this country, yeah.
So.
No, you don't have to worry about it then.
That's something I don't have to really worry about then.
No, not unless you want to go join a synagogue, then even if you're circumcised, you still got the Moel has to do a pinprick, which I think is absurd, but that's...
And every level you go up, because we taught about it pretty extensively last week.
Okay.
And I told them some of that stuff. I have a slightly different take on, I think we're not going to get into the land. There's the example of Joshua there, where they were in the wilderness. They did not, we're in the wilderness now, so some of us didn't get circumcised. And there, they didn't do any circumcisions when they were in the wilderness.
You're right.
Before they could enter into the promised land, they had to be circumcised. Because that promise is for him to give them that land. You don't step foot into Yah's land because you can't keep Passover.
Even the fruit has to be circumcised.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I don't disagree with you at all.
And I said the Acts one, that it was like, that we're not going to make it a prerequisite to salvation, but eventually it says Moshe's read every week in the synagogue, so they're going to hear it over and over and over, and they'll realize, I guess I can't keep a Passover if I'm not circumcised. And they, maybe not the first year, and I said, but eventually you walk that out, you realize, well, I really want to keep that Passover. And so their heart would be pricked to want to go and do it.
Now, we won't have to worry about any of this when we got our glorified bodies, I hope.
Right.
Yeah.
It'll probably come issued circumcised.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
To add to that,
Will there be
issue,
anything to
this-
circumcise?
Hold on, one at a time. Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
No, go on ahead.
No, he's done. You're next.
All right. Well, basically, this is slightly off topic, but it gets to the point, it validates the point to what you were saying, is that one thing that I was studying earlier today was about Melchizedek. And one thing that I discovered was that, one thing that I was reading was that they were Abram and his brother Lot. They basically split up because there was quarreling going on. But one thing that I believe was going on there was greed involved.
On the part of Lot, yes.
On the part of
And he
Lot.
lost it all, didn't he?
Exactly.
He lost a lot.
He lost a lot. Exactly. Now, now to validate the point though, the reason why I believe that he had to go towards the left, towards Sodom, is because there couldn't be any sin in that land at all.
It's Yah's land.
That's
Yah's land.
Although Sodom, I've been there. Sodom is actually part of the land of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's right there by the Dead Sea on the it's traditionally, but right there, I picked up sulfur balls where they believe it's not very far from Qumran.
Wow.
Right, and not very far from the Masada. You could see it. It's like 3 miles away from there. At least that's where some people believe it is. Nobody knows for sure, but there's a lot of sulfur balls around there, and I brought a few back with me. But then Abraham was there in Beersheba in that area. He was right in the heart of the whole thing. So maybe at that time, maybe the Lot was kind of on the edge of the promised land, if you will, because on the other side of the Jordan River and the other side of the Dead Sea, just a few miles away, was outside the inheritance. So at least at that time. So there may be something to that. I don't know. Yeah, you got a
I
thought?
just have one thing extra. In the New Testament, I think we have an example of both someone becoming circumcised and someone, I believe it says, I want to say it's Timothy, that was not compelled to become circumcised. And so I think, from my understanding currently, is that
He did circumcise him.
Paul circumcised Timothy?
I believe so.
Okay, to go into the temple, but then there was another person, maybe it was Titus, who was not circumcised. It says one...
That I'm not sure about.
Okay, maybe we could look at that at a later point.
Yeah, but again, Paul was walking a very difficult walk. Paul was stating it was not a prerequisite for salvation, and yet Paul, I believe, wasn't against circumcision as a righteousness issue. That's what he says here in Romans 4. It's a seal, and he's relating that. So he was trying to, with a very sharp blade, to kind of a pun intended, separate out those that were trying to say circumcision was a requirement for salvation, and that caused people to be anti-circumcision, especially if you're an adult and you want to come to know Yeshua, and and you can't walk in the door without dropping your drawers, and somebody there with a big old knife. It's like, that's pretty intimidating, if not maddening. So he got the people on this side, and he's trying to deal with these guys and deal with these guys and explain what circumcision was, and both physically and spiritually, without obviating its standard or significance, yet at the same time not elevating it up to the point where it was a precondition for salvation. And this is something that Christians, the church, has really, really badly understood. They don't understand these fine things, and they've got Paul saying all kinds of crazy things against the Torah when he was against the false view of the Torah that some of the Pharisees had in his day. And that's what he was fighting.
Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon his name. He's near, he's near, he's near. Yeshua Hashem behimatzov kerabu yoto karov Yasov rasha darko veishavem machshevotav v'yashovel ad Hashem ki arbe is Yeshua Hashem behimatzov keravu Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon his name. He is near, he is near. Yeshua Hashem behimatzot kerahu